So hey everybody, I'm Nick. I run solution consulting here at Contentsquare for North America. Before we get started, I'd love Anthony and Peter, if you guys just introduce yourselves just real quick, give a little background, and then I think we can jump right into it.
Yeah. Hey everybody, my name is Anthony Mills, Senior Director of Experience Optimization, which is our way of basically saying web and app CRO. Been doing CRO for 15 years now. I think even before Optimizely was a product, so those were interesting days.
Peter Klein, Associate Director on Anthony's team, Experience Optimization. Been at Merkle for about 7 years, using Contentsquare for about 3 to 4 years. Spent a lot of time servicing clients and using Contentsquare to push insights into CRO programs.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So, I mean, just getting right into it. So, obviously ROI here is in the title of this sort of session. How do you think about measuring ROI today, and beyond just revenue, sort of what also counts as you guys think about these programs you guys are running for customers and the way you guys are sort of running the business?
Yeah, I think with ROI, it's easy for e-commerce clients, obviously. We're talking about transaction rates, we're talking about average order values, lifetime values, repeat visits. That's really kind of the core. One thing I'll say on that one, I know in a lot of CRO programs, there are a lot of folks that use heuristics, things like Pi or ICE or Lift or PXL. One of the things I've really found that's difficult when you're putting a backlog together and you're trying to convince stakeholders, whether it be your executive teams or whether it be your product teams, to see through an idea or recommendation you've made through data, I found really difficult to use those very abstracted heuristics to convey what the value of an idea is and why somebody should invest the time in their development, their creative teams, their product teams, to see through your A/B test or your personalization idea. And so one of the things we like to propose is, instead of those heuristics, really kind of do a little bit of that extra due diligence and quantify what the annualized incremental lift of your recommendation would mean. That tends to go a lot further when you can say, for instance, we're going to get 10,000 more people to look at a product page, or we're going to take your transaction rate from 1% to 2%, as a for instance. Those can be converted to very tangible volumetric numbers that mean something to a finance team, to mean something to an executive team. And I think that's kind of a really important factor.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess with that in mind, do you guys see this really as more of a support layer, or really like a strategic driver for businesses? And maybe, Peter, maybe it's something for you to take on.
Yeah, I guess my take is that I've done so many analyses and I've seen so many deliverables get put out where it's just great recommendations, and they get presented at a meeting, everybody's very excited about it, and then that sits on a shelf and it never makes it out of the meeting because the business case was not necessarily ever made. And to be able to just play good segment versus bad segment, this segment is more likely to transact. If we push more of that good segment, we can actually see a lift in conversion and actually attach that ROI next to it. So between the good and the bad segment, you're missing conversions, you're missing revenue, and then there's obviously seasonality to account for in the data, but it just becomes kind of that support mechanism of prioritization. If I get revenue numbers up against my ideas each have a dollar value against it. That dollar value makes it into the backlog, and now all of a sudden my backlog is worth $100,000 or $1 million.
And on the strategic versus tactical side of things, a lot of organizations that we work with at Merkle, I traditionally notice that analytics and CRO teams tend to often operate as a support group for product or for UX, as a for instance. And so much of their day is oftentimes monopolized by creating monthly reports, executive business reviews, dashboards for the organization, scorecards, right? And a lot of that information is good. It keeps us directionally on point. But if those functions only exist to be a support level for those teams, what tends to happen is you don't really see the evolution of more advanced testing, more advanced personalization. And so one of the things I like to see, at least in a lot of the clients we work with, is that analytics and CROs start to craft their own roadmap themselves. And sure, they still have a support, component of their job, but really analytics and optimizations teams really need to have their own kind of path that they're taking and collaborate very closely with product development and content to see those things through. I think that's a real big factor. And I think one way to do it is I think a lot of folks in those capacities aren't always the ones that are most extroverted, that are walking around an organization, meeting people in customer service, in finance, in legal, in product, and familiar with what each group's roadmap and priorities look like. And so it's really important, I think, to have those teams afford them the opportunity to go out, network, start creating their own roadmap, and then connecting it with all these teams that they're starting to meet.
Yeah, so one thing I heard a lot is like backlog and cross-functional and a lot of those different pieces. Like what's your guys, how do you think about then the change management, right? Because there's the technology side of this, which obviously Contentsquare provides. There's a people and a process piece, and that typically, from my experience working with a wide range of customers over the last several years, change management associated with all this typically is one of the harder things.
Yeah.
So how do you guys sort of think about that as you go through this process with your customers?
Yeah, I'll take the first one. In terms of change management, the greatest success I found personally has been through organic. I have never once proposed a reorg and had that successfully come out of the gate, as such. And so when I say organic change management, I mean usually by starting small and having that small thing become a win that becomes shared across organization. That starts to, in of itself, create some word of mouth. It starts to do some interesting things about people saying, I didn't know we had that capability. I didn't know about that win or that learning that you obtained. I want to learn more. When are you guys meeting? Can I join? And then I think another one that is often missed, and it seems so silly at times, but celebrating the wins in a meaningful way. So when we have a winning A/B test or a personalization that we split and we have that incremental story, it's a lot of fun to work with our clients to figure out, maybe if we get $1 million plus annualized win on an optimization we deploy, maybe we do socks. We send out socks every time we win, or we have a client that has an 80s whitewashed jean jacket where we have a designer that gets really pumped up when we win to produce patches and pins that go on the jacket. And that stuff, while it sounds kind of kitschy, people walk around their office or they join calls with this gear on, and it just kind of invites conversation, and then you start kind of seeing the organization organically start to kind of change around you.
My biggest change management tactic that I've used, so it's always been kind of frustrating to me that analytics kind of lives at the end of the development cycle, where it's like it goes through design, development, gets launched, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, how did that perform? Well, we didn't track it, or we didn't look at it, or we have previous analyses that said you shouldn't have done this. So in terms of change management, I kind of just like slipping the designer data at the beginning of the process and just be like, hey, just so you know, we have data on this that says this is really high converting or something along those lines. And it takes kind of the pressure off of them because they're kind of designing by best practices, and they're also kind of tired of hearing the analytics people 2 months later saying that you shouldn't have done that, data doesn't support it, and kind of getting roasted at the end of it. So sneaking them data at the beginning, they generally like to use and will take into consideration. So.
Well, let me add to that one. There's what I've traditionally found is when as an optimization team, if you're proposing something that is large in nature, maybe it's a radical redesign of an experience or a page that requires some pretty serious design and development work, or maybe it's an entire journey that is being personalized or tested. It's historically been really hard to get the organizational buy-in on those things after that experience, that feature, that content has already gone into production. Usually our teams that do this type of stuff are left or relegated with only a couple points left in a backlog or that sprint. And so we've got to kind of make it fit and sometimes do things really scrappy and small, and we don't get to actually do the big stuff that's really going to move the needle. And to Peter's point, when you can front run your involvement in the sprint planning process, there's an interesting kind of negotiation I feel like that happens with the product teams where you can start getting some points for your team in advance, and that really enables you to get on their backlog and their level of priority, and then before you know it, you can actually plan some much bigger stuff before it goes into production, because it's much worse when it goes into production and then you're scrambling doing the analysis and saying, well, it didn't perform as we had thought. So it's much nicer to come out of the gate with many variations of that content or that feature and how it functions. It just gives you a lot more bandwidth, a lot more leeway.
Yeah, there was a lot there, but I think there's a couple interesting tidbits, and in particular, I'm curious to get your guys' take. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see in proving the value of CRO to executives, and sort of influencing them and what should be prioritized and what should they focus on first?
I think the biggest challenge, e-commerce, especially companies that derive a majority of their revenue from digital channels, specifically like their website, they're always leading the pack in terms of their maturity. It's when we get into businesses or brands that have longer sales cycles where the transaction happens off of digital channels and more in person, then you start to have oftentimes a problem with attribution and stitching that data together in such a way. A lot of the tests and optimizations we run are very time boxed in nature. And so it can be difficult in those organizations. And if they don't have the tech stack in place where you can really join that data together in a meaningful way, that can be very difficult to understand kind of the long results of it.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too myself, especially like I worked a lot with, car dealers is a great example, right? Or automotive, right? I go to the site, I check out the models, and those are expensive purchases now, right? So how do you link the digital behavior to what happens in a showroom, right? And I think one of the core things that I'm seeing as a trend is identity is really the piece of that. And, I think that's coming back a lot. And then Contentsquare obviously is really focusing on that from our technology and how we're sort of approaching the market. Mm-hmm. So on that same vein, how do you then link some of this stuff to broader goals across CX, across digital, across retention or churn models, things like that? How do you guys go approach that?
Yeah, I think with it oftentimes is a partnership with the product owner that really assists in this regard. Not everything can be tied to revenue or cost, but there are some things that are kind of nuanced that can assist you along the way. So, for instance, I think one of the measurements that I see a lot of folks fail to include in their program is what is the upstream impact of, say, for instance, improving a landing page. It's not just the fact that you've reduced bounce or you've improved the engagement of that landing page experience. It's you also traditionally will find you'll have like a cost per acquisition or cost per lead begin to reduce, freeing more media budget to perform even stronger. And so there's some real good cost savings involved in that. Yeah. We've done a bunch of cost reduction type of tactics, call avoidance, making sure that customer service, those are expensive calls. And so it's very clear sometimes through site search or through calls, how do we get better content on the site so that we can mitigate somebody having to reach out to those more expensive, touch points for the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And you probably saw some of the demos from earlier today where we're showing off some of the things we're able to do now with like linking some of those different disparate data sources together. And I think all of it's 100% spot on. And I definitely see that's where the market's going. So Peter, for you, what do you think about when it comes to this practice, looking at one-off wins versus sort of long-term momentum and long-term success? Like, how do you sort of balance that equation with your customers, and what are some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, like stacking wins, stacking a bunch of small wins. Anthony and I like to use the phrase "looking for change in the cushions." So it's like if your site has as much traffic as a lot of these Contentsquare clients, just pulling out a couple nickels here and there, begin to stack over time, figuring out small little frictions, putting that into the backlog, sorting it from highest revenue opportunity, using that impact quantification or just doing it in Excel, sorting it by that, and just systematically going down the list of highest revenue, lowest level of effort.
And I think the way that you structure your web analytics program One thing that is very rare for me to find when working with new brands is that analytics optimization will be very one-off in its success, in its learnings, in its wins, as will analytics if it is not organized in such a way where you are kind of tiering everything from your high-level business objectives to the point where your finance and your executive team, the things that they really care most about, and then breaking those things down subsequently into what are your business objectives, what are your customers' objectives, and what are your learning objectives. And if you can stagger and create a bit of a staggered analytics project plan, what that's going to tend to allow you to do is that as you do those analyses and you start uncovering those areas of opportunity to improve the customer experience, your optimization recommendations are inevitably going to start laddering onto themselves and start building onto a bigger story. So we have, I can think of an instance where we had a global cosmetic company, and just by picking away, we started doing things like social proof. We started learning things through things like Contentsquare's heat maps, that people really cared about the back of the products, what were the ingredients of that skincare, to where we could allow somebody to not, anytime we can stop somebody from loading new page views, all the better if we can keep them in that same experience. So having like on a hover, a product flip, and then the user can see that experience right for themselves right there. Anytime you can stop them from loading more pages, more tabs, going backwards, and then going back, forward again, a lot of that stuff ladders up to really big wins historically.
So you mentioned web analytics. I know I work with a lot of customers who have either a really good handle on web and maybe not so great of a handle on mobile or even mobile apps or vice versa. And obviously, for me, people who install my mobile app as a customer are my most loyal customers, right, in reality. And so the way I might A/B test or personalize or create experiences there could be drastically different than maybe what I do on the web. And I know you mentioned web in particular. So how do you guys think about those digital modals differently? And how do you think about the approach to those?
Yeah, funny enough, mobile app for a lot of our clientele is not a big revenue driver, so we don't do a lot of mobile app optimization. However, we have found, especially with high ticket items, things like cars or things like integrated tech solutions, B2B type of companies, it's oftentimes needs to be kind of need to reel the fish in slowly and not pull too quick.
Yeah.
And so sometimes rather than try to force their reaching out to sales, for instance, as like your key call to action, there are some softer ways that we can approach them so we can kind of stair step them into the point where they're actually ready to purchase. So, if they're in the research phase, it might be beneficial to say, let's pull back on the hard, contact us, call sales, and instead say, download our mobile app. And that way we'll keep you informed of, any offers that come about, or, you're already interested in the product or service. And so therefore this is a, greater way to be connected. We'll do some of that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess let's go to a couple of customer stories, if we don't mind.
Yeah.
What were some of the wins that you feel like you guys helped support the secured investment in these types of programs, and any maybe particular examples where the ROI was questioned and how you guys sort of approached that and resolved some of that?
I got one. All right.
That was quick.
Health and beauty company, different one than what Anthony was talking about there for a second, but trying to figure out what drives conversion, and more importantly, what distracts from it. So I talked earlier about playing good segment versus bad segment. If you've ever been on an analysis delivery with me, I'm going to say that every time. So I like to compare what do the good guys do versus what do the bad guys do. And health and beauty example is that this particular client offered free samples. If you buy one thing on the site, you can get like 6 free samples of 6 various different products. We found that it was some crazy lift if the conversion rate without interacting with free samples was something like 2%. Once somebody figures out that those free samples are included anytime I buy something and I can get up to 6 of them, the conversion rate went up to something like 23%. So it was a massive conversion rate lift, and then we were able to attach like $24 million of like missed revenue by hiding that free sample thing. So there's $24 million being left on the table by making that free sample thing difficult to interact with or understand, and we found that it was purposely made that way because they didn't want people abusing it. So whether or not that $22 million was real, they said, well, we're losing money on sending out the free samples. So then we actually had their finance team figure out how much those free samples were costing them, and it was a fraction of what the revenue was being left on the table. So just taking it an extra step, like, this is a good idea. This drives conversion. But once you start putting those revenue numbers against it, all of a sudden that PowerPoint is no longer sitting on a shelf, and it's finding its way to new rooms and continuing like that method of playing good versus bad segment and putting revenue against it. So it kind of continues to compound.
Yeah.
Some of my stories are some of my favorite ones actually are some of the easiest ones. They're not the ones that are going to blow your hair back with AI and ML working in the background and just changing everything on the fly. Some are the most simple ones. Like I know a lot of CRO practitioners they wince, I think, at this concept of red versus blue buttons, is like the most kind of silly type of A/B test. But I like to always, whenever anybody kind of challenged me with something simple as that and they're not doing enough, I have one story where we worked with a global tire company, and they have a call to action that permeates throughout all of their domains and all of their brands. And so anytime you want to buy this tire and get it installed, before you could actually do any of that, you had to click on a CTA that said, locate this store. And sometimes you have to recognize the product you're selling. Everybody likes to show like Starbucks or Apple, and these are brands that people just inherently love. But there are some times you work on products that are, I forget the terminology, but it's usually you're buying tires not because you are excited to put new tires on your car, but because it's out of necessity, right? And so what we did is we used a little bit of cognitive bias, and a little bit of psychology. So nobody really wants to go to a tire store. Who wants to do that? And so rather than locate this store, it was as simple as changing it to locate this tire. They want the product. They don't want in their head or in their vision spending time going to a place like that. And that alone was $70 million in annualized incremental. It took us 15 minutes to solution the recommendation and to build it. So anytime you've got something that's so big that only took you 15 minutes, I love stories like that. And my last one, and these are kind of simple ones, but this is where we use machine learning a little bit. This is where I really enjoy working with content and product recommendation engines. So we have a fast fashion company, and it's obvious where anybody who's looking at maybe it's women's clothing, and they're looking at tops. When we came in, there was really just your standard, people also like this. You're looking at this top, I think you might also like this kind of stuff. We started modifying and A/B testing the logic of the product recommendation engine, so that it could start, we were curious. Rather than saying, do they like stuff similar to this, we could start saying things like, oh, people are buying this top, it's cold where you are, so maybe you're looking for some jeans to match it. Any of that type of, it's interesting to A/B and split test the logic behind these recommendation engines, because I think a lot of them get deployed and then you just assume like the ML is figuring out the best. But in reality, there's many ways that you could tweak that logic and see which one gives you the best result.
No, absolutely. So I think a couple of things there. It's simple sometimes is the best way to go, right? Mm-hmm. And then attribution is really, really critical. So I guess looking forward now, sort of a future outlook, what do you think is going to make it easier to prove ROI in the next couple of years?
To prove ROI, AI is going to make it a lot easier. Just bouncing ideas off of it, putting your data into it, and understanding whether or not this win is going to hold, and continuously checking on it to make sure that win is actually realized after a certain amount of time. Because I've definitely done these where I've said it was going to be a 20K lift, and it turns out it didn't hold. It was just a blip. But if you're using AI, it'll actually start kind of being like, oh, you got to factor in this seasonality, you got to factor in this promo was live at this certain point. So just kind of making sure that all your ducks are in a row.
A lot of, AI, of course, it's what I'm already experiencing with what we're working on right now is there is a lot of mundane stuff that we have to do to get to the point of actually deploying and measuring something after the fact. And a lot of it can be kind of tedious to get to that final outcome. So by that I mean, for instance, the time you spend doing the analysis, the time you spend doing project management, because optimization, personalization, you're working with a lot of different divisions within an organization. It's really hard to corral all these people. So AI in finding where the fallout or where the impact loss is has been a real help, because traditionally it was pull it down out of web analytics, put it in Excel, rearrange it. You'd sit down with product, creative, and UX, and you would start spinning around some ideas. Some mock-ups would be generated. Yeah. And I'm not a designer, I'm not a developer, and so I always relied on many other teams to kind of facilitate these conversations. And in between each one of these conversations, there's time that has lapsed in between even scheduling these calls. And so now AI is just rapidly saying, here's an opportunity I found, here's what I think, and I love the impact quantification of Contentsquare. Makes our jobs a lot easier. And then on top of it, it can start giving you some really great UX recommendations based on your data. It can start spitting out some mock-ups. All of a sudden, I'm starting to feel a lot more self-sufficient. Not that I don't need all these other team members, because the mock-ups out of AI is traditionally pretty awful. But still, it gets the conversation started in a really fast way. And then, in the project management side of things, that one is really big, because within a project management of optimization, one of the biggest things we get asked from a lot of our stakeholders is, in the past, the way we used to do things is every time we had a deployment and we had a learning and a success story, we would create this massively long PowerPoint with sections, and each section represented an optimization or personalization we deployed. But it was never easy to how do you query something like that? I mean, it sounds silly, but now with AI, it's great to just be able to load all these learnings up, allow the AI to append its own metadata to understand what was the site section, what was the goal, what was the targeting criteria, what was the date it launched or came down, all that kind of critical stuff you need to know, and then allow somebody to query it, because you're going to have different teams. As these programs grow, you start to have independent teams that start thinking about how they can adopt and do these things in their group themselves. And so they inevitably need to know some history, and to have that repository fueled with AI just makes it a lot more enjoyable to say, have we ever done something like this? Have we ever tried to personalize the homepage hero? If so, what were the results? And boom, here they come. It's real easy.
No, that's where I see this being really effective, especially again with using AI as a core foundational way to drive cross-functional collaboration and just understanding what different teams and departments have done or should do. And ultimately, at the end of the day, right, it's still up to you guys as the practitioners, as the humans, as the strategic drivers to make the final call, right? And it could be something as simple as shop now, shop today, right? And that slight difference could have a tremendous impact on how conversion's driven. So, I mean, I guess in the last 2 minutes here, do you guys have any final thoughts or things that you guys think we should all be left with today?
Final thought for me, I think the real important one is it is super critical to have somebody that is an evangelist for optimization. I think it's super critical not to get lost. When we talk about personalization and people start throwing in things like agentic, omni-channel, orchestrated personalization, at some point you start to gloss over. You're thinking to yourself, okay, well, we just started doing content split testing. So what are we doing talking about omni-channel orchestrated, agentic experiences? So start simple, start basic. Make sure that you have all your stakeholders in alignment with you, and that you are helping to make. One of the great things that I love about this business is that we've been able to promote a lot of our clients in their current roles, because we made it so easy for them to say, as a product owner, I just released this new feature, and here's my annualized incremental impact to the bottom line, which has traditionally been really hard to do if you don't split traffic. One of the worst things I think an analyst can be asked is pre and post something going live. How did it perform? You're like, oh, well, media mix changed throughout that period, and we have all kinds of other historical effects. Splitting it, holdout groups, just makes your life so easy.
Yeah, absolutely. What about for you, Peter?
I mean, you're using a tool like Contentsquare or a traditional analytics tool. You're presenting these ideas to leadership in one way or another. And again, like, no one is listening, or someone might be asleep in the presentation. And once you put that ROI number, take that 15 minutes. It's sessions times missed conversions times ROI times your time period, or divided by your time period. So just take that extra 15 to 20 minutes, Contentsquare does it for you. It's crazy where those ideas eventually find themselves.
Awesome, guys. Well, hey, I appreciate you guys being tremendous partners of ours. It's awesome to have you on stage. Thanks for talking with us today. And I don't know if anybody has any questions out in the audience, or you guys can also find these guys walking around. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk with anybody if you have any additional thoughts. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can you turn this mic on? Okay. Kind of going back to the AI and how you feel like CRO is going to really benefit, I am curious with your customers if there's been conversations on offsite CRO or how CRO is going to evolve with, AI search first. A lot of research is happening offsite, and, thinking about traditional CRO, we're thinking, clean buyer journey. And now it is 80-90% taking offsite. So how is it going to evolve, in the age of AI?
Yeah, my prediction, and I don't know if I'm much of a futurist, but I think one of the things I'm most excited about the evolution of AI as it pertains to CRO. I don't know about offsite as much, but one of the things I'm both excited and scared about a little bit is today we still are very manual in the split testing process. I think with AI, and even with just machine learning, I'm waiting for the day where, and I believe we will be at a point where we no longer have to really do split testing, whether it be a personalization or whether it be an A/B test. I think split testing itself will eventually go away, and I see a place where we have a CMS that is constantly being loaded up with new value propositions, new copy, new imagery, new site structure, page and template structures that at any point could be targeted to any particular key segment. And it's just always trying to figure out what the right combination is to show people. And it doesn't really need a practitioner always with a thumb on the scale to say what's working, what isn't, when do we shut it off, when do we promote it to 100% of the traffic. It's instead always just tinkering with that. I can't save a story for another time where sometimes those things can go horribly awry if you allow that machine learning to take off too quick without the right controls in place and without the right content for the right persona that you've developed. Then I've seen some places where people really go sideways and they've kind of checked out assuming that the machine is optimizing in that capacity, and they've lost out on a lot of time and value. But I see that being kind of the ultimate future for CRO. It's just going to be an always on, always going, always optimizing, and it's going to be a lot less split testing.
Yeah, I think AI actually is going to be almost like a persona you have to design for a person, right? Like it's going to be this AI thing that you're going to have that, and there's certain types of people who are going to use that constantly, and then there's other types of people, and again, depending on the nature of what you're selling and how transactional it is and price point, I think that's also another persona. I think there's going to be two things simultaneously happening, and you're going to have to keep those in mind, and that's what I believe is going to happen here, at least in the short term.
Question over here.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's been really interesting to hear all of those. My question is predominantly for B2B companies with long sales cycle. How would you go about getting the ROI or proving the ROI, especially for like strategic and long-term investments, to get in two stages? One, to get buy-in in the first place, but then also to validate once it's implemented.
It's a real challenge. With long sales cycles, inevitably what tends to happen with a lot of these CRO platforms is we get cookie, expiration. We start having our results be polluted. The longer it runs, the more likely we start to have false positives in our results. And so in those instances, what we tend to find is we usually will use some kind of our data science team will do some modeling that will start to suggest if we start to see certain behavior from those people, while it might not be the end actual purchase that might happen 3, 6, 9 months from the point of the optimization, we have some good indicators that can kind of tell us what we think is going to happen, and then we kind of run with that, and then we are always kind of backtracking after the fact. One of the things that we do that I think is really important that a lot of people don't do is they'll launch something that won, and they'll celebrate. They'll say, here's the impact we made as the organization, but they don't do the due diligence to follow up on it long term. And so you might have a win, you might have something in your data models say that it is a win, and you start to report that to the organization. But I think you build a lot of trust in your organization when you say, but we're going to keep eyes on it, and we're going to see. And the nice thing is, over time, content is going to be changing, media strategy is going to be changing. And so if you get a lift on something that might start to regress over time, it fosters good conversation. Why is it falling back to our mean? Why did it not stick and hold the way we thought it was? So sometimes it's a little bit of modeling up front, and then on the back end, it's just validating over a long period to see, toss out the false positives.
Yeah, I think it's also tied a little bit to like an ABM strategy too, right? In a long sales cycle in a B2B environment, right? You think about an account, you're going to think about like depth of penetration in that account, which is probably count of people who have organically identified themselves or some sort of engagement with you. The other side is frequency of touch points, right? And so for me, I think there's some sort of equation there that fits right, and CRO helps impact both of those things, right? Depending on what you're trying to do. Am I trying to expand my footprint or expand my depth of relationship within that account? And I think that's a balance there, but I think that's a big part of that as well.
Awesome. We might be able to do one more question. Fabulous. All right, I'll give you the mic. And then this last one, Merkle does have a booth. It's right over on this side. So I really encourage you to go visit their booth if you have any other questions.
Thank you. Peter from House of Kaizen. And I agree with the whole putting revenue numbers on everything, especially the annualized revenue number. What we found in experimentation is that we need to also factor in decay, which I think you started to allude to, Peter, in one of your comments. How do you guys factor in decay into the annual revenue that you're projecting versus like a straight 12 months at this lift?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I've used it so heavily for like a prioritization mechanism just to get stakeholder buy-in. So once we realize that 6-month revenue lift that is there, and then we revisit, we start to notice that we're starting to lose the gains on that, then it's time to just start revisiting it and see how we can further optimize. What do you think?
When you say decay, do you mean do you mean the signal loss from the time that something is live, and again you're starting to you're talking about cookie loss, is that, or do you mean decay in terms of like performance of the test? We usually will set up a dashboard, so anything that we publish to and we have found that was successful, we usually will keep a long-standing dashboard, and we just make kind of a ritual of checking that to see if the decay has happened, and if so, then it goes back into our analytics cycle where we start trying to understand why that decay might be happening. Is it because new content came up? Is it because media changed? Is it because what won at the time is become stale? Maybe it was just kind of a novelty effect that we realized up front. I think that's really just kind of the key. And honestly, there are times where I like actually reporting back to my clients that whatever fancy annualized revenue number we report as a team collectively that we've contributed to the business, I sometimes like taking that down. It shows them that there's honesty, there's real due diligence in what we're doing. I think that kind of garners some trust.
It's like, just to add on, I mean, like, just like looking at what else changed on the site, it's generally like, my PDP win started to decline. Well, we have these new promos or something pushing people in different places. So there's generally some type of like cause and effect. So going back up the funnel, how did people get here? How did that change? So what are the other metrics that changed along with that? And trying to like figure out like where was the gap? What happened? Did somebody launch something over here that has now changed the trajectory of everybody else? So kind of like going back upward and tracing it back. Generally, you can kind of come up with something that may have caused it. A testable hypothesis.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. This concludes our content in the breakout room.